to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester podcast. We are a community built on love, hope, and justice. Our goal is to inspire people to take on the challenges of a changing world. Each week we'll bring you a reflection from our minister, the Reverend Aaron Payson, recorded during our Sunday service. Maybe it'll move you, challenge your thinking, or even stir up a little righteous indignation. That's all welcome here. Thanks for listening.
The words of Rainer Maria Rilke. You, God, who live next door. If at times through the long night I trouble you with my urgent knocking, this is why. I hear you breathe seldom. I know that you're all alone in that room. If you should be thirsty and there's no one to get you a glass of water, I wait, listening, always. Just give me a sign. I'm right here. As it happens, the wall between us is very thin. Why couldn't a cry from one of us break it down? It would crumble easily. It would barely make a sound. I found this favorite poet's words at the beginning of an article on the story of Hanukkah by David Hoffman from the Jewish Theological Seminary, published about 8 years ago. He notes in his article that Rilke's words express the need and the pathos of the soul who seeks God, yet the desire of the narrator to experience intimacy with God is never fulfilled. The pain and the frustration generated by the poem is heightened by the awareness that God lives literally next door, so close yet remaining hidden and alone. The poet's words powerfully capturing the raw emotions and frustrations that are so often felt in the spiritual life of those people who call themselves religious. When I heard this, though, I thought immediately of my friend and colleague, now of blessed memory, Forrest Church, who once described God saying, "God is not God's name. God is our name for that which is greater than all and yet present in each." I like that definition. With this in mind, I return to Rilke's words with a deeper appreciation for the yearning captured by her words of each of us to relate deeply to the most authentic part of ourselves and the universe itself. Scientists are wont to remind us that we are, at our most fundamental level, made of the same elements of all creation. We are stardust, animated. We are the universe alive to itself. A yearning is expressed in poetic measure for authentic intimacy and comfort with that out of which we each have come and to that which all of us will in end return. And I think it is this yearning, by whatever words one uses, that often compels us into our relationships with other people, our relationships into community, our relationships with nature, our relationships with the numinous. But what, I hear you ask, does any of this have to do with Hanukkah? Hear me out. Most of us know the story of Hanukkah in some version, yes? Mm-hmm. In short, Hanukkah is that 8-day Jewish festival, and it was considered a minor festival until just a few years ago when the United States actually brought it back to the fore in the 20th century. It's the festival that commemorates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 164 before the Common Era, after the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire, which was a response in the 2nd century of the before the Common Era to Seleucid King Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, who tried to impose Hellenistic culture on the Jews and desecrated the temple by dedicating it to Zeus. The story is told of a Jewish priest named Mattathias and his son Judah Maccabee, who led a revolt against this oppression, and victorious in their efforts, restored Jewish religious freedom and reclaimed the temple, whereupon on the 25th of Kislev, the Hebrew calendar, the temple was purified and rededicated by lighting a menorah, marking the beginning of Hanukkah, as we have come to know it. The miracle of the story is that there wasn't enough consecrated oil to last a day, but in fact it lasted 8 days, and thus the 8-day festival that we now know as Hanukkah was born. That's the short version. But within its telling are nuances that are hidden unless you know more of the history of how Hanukkah came into being. Nuances which not only complicate our comprehension of this episode in Jewish history, but also might, to make a point today, shine light on the significance of the story for many now. First, let's consider the oil discovered amidst the rubble of the temple. So while the story tells of only one canister of consecrated oil was available for the ritual lighting of the candelabra in the temple, it turns out that ritual oil was not necessary for the lighting. How's that? As David Hoffman notes, the true nature of the miracle of Hanukkah, according to Pnei Yeshua, and here he's referring to Rabbi Jacob Joshua Falk, who was a 17th and mid-18th century rabbi of Polish and German descent and a Talmudist, who wrote in his great work, is not that the vial of ritually pure oil miraculously lasted 8 days. Indeed, even if they had not found this container of pure olive oil, the menorah in the temple could have been kept lit. For according to Rabbi Falk, ritually unfit containers of oil could have been used for lighting the menorah after the temple was rededicated, because there's an interesting law in Judaism that permits the use of things rendered impure provided that they are used for communal needs. I want you to think about that. That purity is overshadowed by communal needs. It's a very interesting law. So in truth, there wasn't a need for the miracle of the oil, where 1 day's worth of pure oil lasted 8 days. Given this understanding, Rabbi Falk asks us to reconsider the way that we tell the story of Hanukkah, and consequently also reconsider its religious meaning. The question of meaning here, remember, from my standpoint, this is the essence of spirituality. For those of you who say, I'm not spiritual, I go hogwash. Everyone is spiritual because every one of us is in search of meaning in some fashion. Some of us find it in science. Some of us find it in mathematics. Some of us find it in the writing of the mystics. Some of us find it in meditation. Some of us find it in sacred scripture. We're all in search of meaning. We all have our pathways to meaning. Therefore, I'm telling you, y'all are spiritual, whether you want to be or not. Okay? So, let's get back to the story here. The question of meaning, the spiritual nature of the story, according to Hoffman, was not that God provided oil that we could not have had otherwise. Rather, He writes, God kept a small quantity of oil miraculously aflame for 8 days in order to communicate to the Jewish people that God was present in their community. The miracle of the oil was that God gave the Jewish community, the very people who had suffered so greatly in their war against the Greeks, a clear sign that they had not been abandoned. Now, I'm not asking you for a theological conversion here, for those of you who are going to come at me after the service and go, what are you talking about God for? Okay? I'm asking you to consider the way in which we as communities address the reality that people are still looking for signs that they have not been abandoned. Remember David's words? So many people who have come into our country, so many people in our country now that are facing hardships that none of us have to face. And they want to know they haven't been abandoned. What are they looking for? That people who have been subjugated and traumatized by war and the desecration of the ritual center of their communal religious life, right, would look for signs that there was life and blessings and possibilities beyond the hardships that they had endured, makes the Hanukkah story a human story, and no less valuable today than when it was first rendered. Recently, a spat of research has suggested that we're in an era of spiritual renewal as a country, which comes as good news for ministers who have been studying for the last few decades that the church is dying or already dead. And the truth is that there is still a great deal of decline in the participation in religious institutions, but that does not translate to people not yearning for spiritual depth. The question is how to align who we are in religious community to that yearning for meaning, for purpose, for a sense that they're not alone in a world that seems to continue to want to marginalize the most vulnerable. Would appear in the moment that there is a clamor for meaning in the midst of the trials and tribulations of our ongoing political discord, our economic uncertainty, and threats to the liberties and freedoms of so many of us who cherish and have worked to attain these freedoms over the decades. I think about the generations of women that are now dealing with the return or the reversal of Roe v. Wade, and all of the effort that it took to get here in 1970. I think about all of the people who spent their lifeblood, generations, gaining the right to vote, who are seeing their efforts turned on its head. I see all of the efforts of those who unionized, who worked for those who were new arrivals in our country to find not just place, but home, wondering what now? The Public Religion Research Institute reports that approximately 65 to 66% of Americans identified as Christian in 2023-2024, and at the same time, the institution emphasizes high levels of religious chum, frequent disaffiliation, switching between traditions, and the redefinition of what one believes. Our work highlights the influence of political polarization, institutional distrust, and generational transition on religious identity, and what that means is we're not our parents. And we never wanted to be, until we woke up that morning like this morning and realized that that moan that we heard our father give every time he got out of bed is coming out of our own mouth, right? We may not want to become our parents, but as we grow, we find we are closer and closer to that vision. The pastoral implication of all of this is that disaffiliation often reflects relational and institutional breakdown rather than outright theological rejection. Trust, credibility, patient shepherding matter deeply in this climate, says PPRI. All this suggests that the church is experiencing the same kind of skepticism that plagues so many of our public institutions, especially the government these days. The trend, I suspect, also is a dynamic of the unholy alliance that so many have witnessed between certain forms of Christian nationalism and the history of courting political power. The research also suggests that people continue to yearn for authentic spiritual, and what I mean, again, is deep meaning, authentic spiritual depth, and they crave communities that reflect the integrity that is so much a part of that deep spiritual understanding, which is where I think we as a congregation come in. And we come in as a wider religious movement. I've said all along that I believe that we experience the decline of many religious communities as we continue to experience the decline of many religious communities. The communities that survive and indeed thrive are those that are inviting folks into all sorts of backgrounds and beliefs and practices into relationship in order to find a spiritual home, not to create bastions of right belief or right practice, but to reflect an authentic desire for deep communion with each other and the well-being that each of us craves for all. Congregations have movements of, dare I say, love, hope, and justice. Returning to the story of Hanukkah, the second nuance that captures my attention this year is that the story of the miracle of the light makes it into the record at all. It was added later than the books of the Maccabees were created, when the initial historical account or mytho-historical account of what transpired came to the fore. It is considered a half-Torah, for those of you who may or may not know what that means. It means that it is something that is semi-revered within Jewish community, but outside the context of the Torah itself. And it comes into play during these times when festivals require that the story be extended beyond the Torah itself. So here I'm indebted to the work of scholar Ishmar Schorsch, who's also of the Jewish Theological Seminary, who argues that the texts used by the Jewish community during Hanukkah, those that are half-Torah outside of the Torah itself, suggest that the inclusion of the miracle of the Hanukkah oil in the text is not as straightforward as we would imagine. He writes, the connection between the Haftorah and Hanukkah is not at all seamless. Beneath the surface, one detects an attitude of ambivalence. That's an interesting observation about the story. If not outright estrangement, right? Which accords with abundant evidence that the rabbis viewed the Maccabees as problematic. The point of the prophet Zechariah, who is often quoted at this time of the year, is to minimize the role of human initiative. Words that you may have heard in other contexts, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the God of heaven's hosts. Zechariah 4:6. As a commentary on Hanukkah, the Haftorah intones the potency of divine love and loyalty, next to which the courage and the ingenuity of the Maccabees is of little consequence. Equally discordant, writes the scholar, is the division of power sanctified by Zechariah's vision. While religious authority abides in the figure of Joshua the high priest, political leadership is invested in Zerubbabel. God delivers a message to each respectively, thus preserving the dichotomy between priest and king. And we thought that the separation of church and state was a modern invention, right? But here we are, right? Even Moses in the wilderness left cultic duties to his brother, and I love this, Aaron. That's the way it should always be, right? Rather than usurp them to consolidate all the power in his own hands. And yet that's precisely, says the scholar, what the Maccabees did as the Syrian threat receded. In the year 140 BCE, a year after he had finally destroyed the detested Greek citadel in Jerusalem, Simon, the last of Mattathias' 5 sons to remain alive, had himself elected by great assembly of priests and people and leaders of the nation and the elders of the community as high priest and general and governor of the Jews, until a true prophet could arise. Again, in Greek fashion, copies of the decision affirming this unprecedented concentration of power were preeminently displayed in the temple and deposited for posterity in the National Archives. Shorish continues, noting, I suspect that the choice of the prophet Zechariah for Shabbat Hanukkah delivers a muted reprimand by the rabbis for this blatant departure from tradition. By overreaching in their quest for power, the Maccabees had tarnished their nobility and the nobility of their uprising against apostasy. Years later, according to a garbled story in the Talmud, the Pharisees broke with Alexander, the most bloodthirsty of the later Hasmonean rulers, saying, the crown of political authority is enough for you. Leave the crown of the priesthood to the seed of Aaron. This last admonition has been very present to me when there were reports that surfaced that our president wanted to be considered for the next pope. Moreover, the tradition of the division between cultic and political power seems most important to remember these days as we continue to counter forms of Christian nationalism that see the current administration as having been ordained and sent by God to rule in this moment in history. So the story of the Hanukkah lights turns out to be an attempt by the rabbis to reorient their community to the survival of their people, not the might of the Maccabees. Amidst an era of tremendous hardship, while at the same time relying on the miracle to marginalize the growing sentiment that those who had gained political power from the events should be given ultimate power. The fact that the miracle story is only added to the Talmud in the 5th century of the Common Era, much later than the crafting of the original story of the books of the Maccabees, would confirm this logic of the reorienting role. So, here's my question. What are the signs that we're looking for today that help us remember that we are not alone? Not the signs of military might that we see being carried out in the Caribbean and in other parts of the globe where nations continue to batter nations in order to prove that they're capable of doing that. What do we look for in this moment of tremendous anxiety, tremendous uncertainty to remind us that we're not alone? I think, for me, what has been most potent, especially over the last few weeks, are those opportunities where I have gotten together with people in the community at large who have been on the ground prior to COVID and during COVID and post-COVID, who met the challenge of this era by saying, we need to step up. We need to not just allow people to go hungry or without access to health care. We need to remember that we have the power as individuals combined to bring resources to those who need them. Now, you might think about this in the context of charity, But the difference between charity and what I'm talking about is that what happened was not transactional. It was not, I'm going to give you something in order to get something in return. It was the heart of the community coming together and saying, this is not about which one of us will survive. This is about the desire for all of us to survive. And so whatever resources I have, whatever resources we have, needs to be distributed differently than the systems and the institutions that are now in lockdown and that are now not able to function because people are sick with COVID. We need to be able to step up. And we're in another era of that, are we not? It's not COVID now. It's the threat of the loss of food. It's the threat of the loss of health care. It is the threat of people who are our neighbors and our loved ones being deported. It is threat. The now cries for us to come together in grand communal ways to say, this shall not stand. This is not our best selves. This is not even close to what we're capable of being in community. And so this is an opportunity to literally rediscover what we truly rely on. Because when push comes to shove, ain't none of us going to the grave happy that we made all kinds of money. When push comes to shove, when we meet that moment in our lives, what we're thinking about is, how much love did I add to the world? How many people are going to remember me as someone who mattered to them? Our capacity to create those relationships is what saves us. We go from crisis to community. Much the same way that the Torah, that in Judaism we move from the stories of the Torah of wandering the wilderness to the stories of the Haftorah, which remind us that towards the end of that arc is the opportunity for rededication. And so we come to this moment with another question: to what shall I rededicate my life? For wealth? For property? Or for people? We gather in the wilderness of our time, between promise and uncertainty, between exile and homecoming. We are a people of journey, seeking light in the shadows, seeking hope in the turning of days. Like Israel wandering, we hunger for meaning. We thirst for justice. We long for belonging. In the desert of our own division, we discover manna called compassion, water of renewal, and the Spirit who guides us still. Voices rise like prophets of old, crying out against idols of fear, calling us back to covenant love. We will not forget the stranger. We will not forsake the widow. We will not silence the oppressed. In many tongues, in many songs, the Spirit breathes unity in diversity. We are one body, many members, one flame, many candles, one hope, many hands. Though we feel scattered, though trust seems broken, though the story feels lost, exile is not the end. Return is written in our bones. Renewal is planted in our soil. Like the oil that burned beyond its measure, Like the light that endured against the night, we kindle hope in fragile vessels, rededicating our hearts, rededicating our homes, rededicating our nation to justice and peace. Amen. And blessed be.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're just crossing our path, either new to this congregation or curious about Unitarian Universalism, check out our website, uucworcester.org. You'll find lots of information there about our beliefs, the 8 guiding principles, religious exploration for children and adults, our social action initiatives, and the many groups we offer to help people connect and have fun. And consider joining us in person or online on a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. We'd love to meet you.